Hello everyone. Now we're here in our general note sheet to start showing you guys how to make plan sheets, basic plan sheets for notes, and the next one we'll jump into is typical sections. So we'll just cover these basic plan sheets in this video, and in the next video we can jump on to creating some roadway plan sheets where we've got multiple boundaries and all of that stuff. But for this is basically just simple singular boundaries, or if you've got multiple sheets, we just create a couple extra boundaries. So in a general note sheet, it's important to note what scale you'd like to use. Typically with general notes, or any note sheet for that matter, I like to use full size 1:1. There's really no detailing in here or anything like that that requires scaling. And so for simplicity, I like to keep it at full size 1:1. So I've got a sheet that I created in here already. So you can see we've got our name boundary here. And if we go look, we've got a drawing model. And in the drawing model, you can see basically what we just saw in the default model, and then we can flip over to the sheet model. And this is it sheeted. For this project, originally, this sheet border is just live in the file. And so if you watch the previous video on sheet seeds, you can kind of see that the problem here is that, if I have to add this sheet border cell each time, that means I have to populate it each time I create a sheet. So that can be, for a general note sheet, it's not that bad, but as we get into plan sheets, profile sheets, cross-section sheets, you're having to edit a lot of different sheets, and that can get frustrating. So obviously using that sheet seed's a big help. So we'll go back to our default model, and what we'll do is let's just create like a couple more sheets here. We'll just create a sheet for each one of these columns of notes here. And going back to that cell library I introduced in the first video with the sheet seeds, we can open up this cells, and if it doesn't open up automatically, you can come here to the bottom. And so this is just for console users. If you wanted something like this for yourself and you're outside of console, you would have to obviously create this cell library and put it in the correct location. That's Workspace's FDOT standard cell, and FDOT will find that and bring that in for you here. And so there's a couple different name boundaries right at the top here. And the reason I created two of them is because if you do a full size 1:1, which is what we want, if I double click on this, I always double click and it never actually takes it. So you can see for whatever reason we've got scale. This is actually 1/12, so it actually makes sense in a second once I show you why there's two different ones here. So I want this to be 1 because it's full size 1:1, and that will be the same exact size as that name boundary right there. So I placed it on top there just so that I can grab it and just slide it over so that it's just in line with it. And if I want to be really tricky with it, I could say 1.3 or 1.4. So then you can just keep moving it over at the same spacing. And once you get the spacing, you can copy from the corners. We'll get two sheets in here. So going back to the other one that's in here, this name boundary is 1 inch equals 1 foot. So we double click that and it's 1:1. That's 1 inch equals 1 foot, because ORD's basically based on inches instead of feet. And so if I were to do 1/12 for this one, actually takes it, there we go, it's the same size. So for this one is intended for anything 10 scale, 20 scale, 30 scale, all the way up, because if I wanted to do the right size there, I just put in 20 and it's simple. That's a 20 scale sheet right there. That's how much bigger it is than full size 1:1. But if I had used the same one, this one's just a lot easier to use because you just put in 1 and it's full size 1:1. So there's no having to divide by 12 to get down to full size 1:1. It's just straight up, boom, there you go. So that's kind of a background of why there's 2 of these, and full size 1:1 sheets, use that. Anything else that's going to get scaled up 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever it is, use that. So we've placed cells here now, and you can't create name boundaries out of cells. So the first thing that we have to do is just come and drop those to their shapes. So we've got a shape now. And let's just, so another thing I like to do is just to kind of make sure everything's in the same spot. I'll just move this here, and then I can move it from that corner to that corner. So now I know that that origin point is the exact same on both sheets, and we can do the same thing here. Like, it doesn't really matter what the contents of these are. I just want to make sure that we have something in each sheet. And it doesn't really matter what level this is on. It's just going to take whatever level that your active level is. Once we create a name boundary out of it, it's going to automatically become this level. So we can go ahead and close this, and we'll go to OpenRoads modeling, drawing production, and again, make sure that you have this set up full size 1:1 when you begin doing your name boundary tool. Okay, so we have our name boundary tool here, and for this type of sheet, I want to do civil plan by element. So that basically means I've got an element sitting out here that I want to use to create a sheet. And we've got a note sheet here. Like I said, you can create typical section sheets. I've even used this to create intersection detail sheets because I want that intersection detail to be rotated exactly how I want it to be. It doesn't necessarily need to be based off of any center line or anything like that, because typically the sheets aren't connected end to end like they are with plan sheets. So we'll just select our drawing seed, and so this is where naming your drawing seeds is important, making sure that in the previous video you went back and changed things, because you can see down here my project 11 by 17 plan only shows up nice and clear right here. Boom, this is the one I know I want to use. Because if I had named it this, it might show up twice and you might not know which one to grab. So having this as a unique name is very important when choosing your drawing seed, because it helps you pick the correct one. So this first click is really important, because right down here it says identify path element, lower left hand corner, reset to skip. So I don't have a path element. So what happens is if I click anywhere on this box, it's going to think whatever I click is the path element, and it might end up that your sheet gets rotated, and you don't want it to be that way. You want it to be rotated in this orientation that you're seeing right here. So I want to reset to skip, and because I'm going to do 2 sheets, I can control select these 2 sheets, and then I want to left click to grab the sheets. Now this is where I would come in here, because if you start typing things too soon, sometimes as you select sheets, it might reset the name of your group or the name of your sheet. Let's go over here. So I've got general underscore notes -1. So in order for this to keep in the same sequence, essentially, I want to call this general underscore notes -2. So that will keep it in the same sequence, and then I could also just add it to that group that I already had. Or if you wanted to create a new group, you could give that group a name. And what I've been doing since this original sheet was made is I like to add a 0 here for anything that's essentially 0 to or 1 to 9, because when you start adding them to like print sets or sheet index or anything like that, it only sees this first character 1, and then when you get like 10, 20, 30, it can get them out of sequence. So it's a good idea to keep two digits here. So now that I've got this all set up, I have a few things here. So we're using V rotation. We are creating a drawing when I click here, so you can turn that off if you want to create all of your drawing boundaries first and then later come in and create the drawings from those boundaries. And then I always have show dialog on because that allows me to tweak the settings for these. So now it's telling me accept, reject, data point. So I'm looking in the lower left hand corner again, and you can always look there to get help with what ORD expects you to do next. So I click. So you can see how they're turning there, and as I click through the options, I get the dialog that comes up here. And typically what I'll do, like the view name, what it does is each of these view name, model name, and model name here is taking the group name dash the name of the sheet. And so I don't need all of that information, so I usually end up just deleting this group name out of the beginning here, like that. Okay, so you can do that for all three of them. And this will increment the name as it creates more of them. So you just want to make sure that you name this whatever the next number in line is that you need. As we move down here, you can see that it's using this as our seed model. So that's the project plan profile access. It's using this to create that. And one thing we want to do with our annotation is we want to change our annotation to full size 1:1. It's giving us 1 inch equals 50 feet because that is what the annotation is in the seed file, but we're still able to change it to whatever we want. No annotation group for a text file like this, and so we'll just keep moving on. And then same thing down here with this detail scale. You want to change that to full size 1:1. Another thing you can do is, if you're happy with these sheets, is you can add to sheet index. When you do that, sometimes you might have in here, what I've been doing is creating individual folders within my sheet index. I actually just started using sheet index again in 10.12 pretty recently, just because in previous versions I've always had trouble with it, and I finally decided to check it out again, and it's actually worked out pretty well. So I actually started using it again. But this is just a good idea if you do have individual folders in here, to make sure that it gets added to the correct folder, because each folder might have different settings with it. Like roadway, usually it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, but if you're doing like signing and pavement marking set, you usually have like an S dash sheet number, or what is it, signalization is T, or whatever it is. So you just want to make sure that you add that to the right folder. So I'm just going to cancel out of this because I don't have a sheet index set up for this sample project, and we'll just turn that off. So now that we have everything correct in here, it's good to get a quick review and make sure you got everything right, and then you can hit OK. So you can see it's created our sheets, and typically it'll drop you into the last sheet model that it creates. But we can see that we've got these other two sheet models here, and in the last video we changed our sheet seed to use the drainage EOR Leviticus Cornwall here, and that one came in just fine. So the great thing is, if you ever need to go change the EOR for your drainage, for example, you would just go into your Plan RD border and change this engineer of record, or any of these things in this border, for example. So what we can do here is, let's show how these cells that we set up in the previous video work. So if we go to FDOT, Toolbar, and Plan Set Manager, we can edit single sheet. Right now, everything is empty. Typically your sheet number is going to be populated by your sheet index. We can just put this as 1 for right now. The good thing about using the plan border is you don't need to touch any of this or this, so the only thing that we're paying attention to right now is this sheet information. So this is a general note sheet, so I'm going to make sure caps is on and type general notes and hit OK. So that changed the sheet number to 1. General notes is right in the middle where it needs to be. All right, now let's just say that we wanted to do a 2-line piece of text in here, and we just came into here and we'll remove general notes and we'll just call it, let's just do general notes King Street. Okay. So you can see how that replaced the middle one, but then the spacing between these 2 lines is actually a lot better. If you were to try and have like a 3-line piece of text, you'd have this top one would be up a little higher and this would be down a little lower, and you'd have this big gap between your pieces of text. So I think this just looks a lot better, and typically you don't have 3 lines of text anyway. So that is how you would update that. And I want to go over something interesting that I discovered while making this video. So when I was coming in here the first time to make the video, I had set up, do the single line general notes, and then I went to make this 2-line general note, and it wasn't working. And what this relies on right here, you can see, is this item type that's listed under it, that multi-line title. And if we go and look at, we can look at the properties of this, and if you wanted to, looks like I actually added a space there, but if you wanted to edit the text that way, now you're editing these properties, and you can edit the text that way too. That's essentially all the Plan Set Manager is doing, is updating the property of this item type. So what was happening is, if I go back to default and I go to, see what I want to do, utilities and my item types, so if I click this little button here, what I had noticed was this FDOT sheet info right here did not have a green check. It had something else next to it, which basically means it was out of date. And this item type was not there. So this library was here, but this item type was not here. So when I created the sheets, it didn't have the item type it needed to populate the information in that cell. And so all I had to do was come up here and do update all from library. Obviously I can't do it now because I just did it. But if you're discovering that, like me, your sheet top and sheet bottom aren't coming in, that's probably the reason, is because it doesn't have the item type that it needs to do that. So that pretty much is it for this one right here. If we go back to our general notes sheet, I mean, obviously we still have everything set up. You can see everything came in properly. We've got everything here. Next thing we'll do is move on to a typical section sheet and kind of go over the differences between doing a full-size 1-to-1 sheet like this and then choosing a proper scale for something like a typical section sheet. Okay, now we're here in a typical section file, and I've got some typical sections from a few different projects attached and live in here. So what's actually live is we've got this right here. So these typical sections are interesting because I believe these, let's just see, these are 20 scale, just based on what the drawing production is telling me. These are 20 scale, so we can test that out if we just go attach our border here. So I want to use the plan name boundary here, 1 inch equals 1 foot. And then I can use 20 scale for a 20 scale sheet. And you can see that that is in fact the size of these sheets. So let's just put these 3 sheets in here. Oh, did I miss the last one? No, I didn't get it. So I've already gone ahead and deleted the drawing and sheet models out of here. And so just as an example, if you ever want to delete your sheets, that's essentially what you need to start with, is deleting the drawing and sheet models. And then you come over here to this name boundary tool, click on this, and it looks like sometimes it's hard to see which one is actually the one you're using, because it will also show you ones that are in references. So I believe it's this one. Yep, you can see that because it highlights everything. And so you can also come in here and delete individual sheets out of the group, or if you want to delete all the sheets in the group, you can just go ahead and delete. And it's important that you also do want to delete the saved views, because if you try and come back and make sheets, new sheets with similar names, it'll like increment the saved view name, like dash 1 or something like that. So it's always best to just get rid of those saved views. So we'll just go ahead and do that. And you can see it deletes the drawing models out of here. And so I've got my boxes in here, and I'll remember to drop these to their shapes, and we'll be good. So we can see that this is 20 scale, but this typical section looks pretty small. Like I wouldn't expect it to need to be 20 scale. And so I kind of looked at this here, and if I go measure some of this stuff, we can see that these lanes are actually, this 11-foot lane is actually 22 foot drawn. So what's been done in this file is the drawing itself has been scaled up. And there's really no reason to do that. What we should have done in this instance is drawn everything to scale. So where this lane is actually 11 feet, this sidewalk's 10 feet, all of that, and done something similar to what we did down here. Now this is a 10 scale sheet. So let's go do this. 10. We'll just stick that guy right there. And I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to copy all of this stuff into the file just so that we have it. Okay. So obviously this all looks enormous because it's intended to be 10 scale annotation. If I go in and change it to 10, everything looks normal again. We can come in and measure this 11-foot lane, and it's actually 11 feet. So this is the ideal way that I would do something like a typical section, where this is, a 3-lane typical section. It's pretty small. I can do something at 10 scale, and it fits. It fits inside this 10 scale box. Why would you ever use anything other than 10 scale? Well, here's another project over here, and this I think is using 15. Let's check. Oh, this is actually using 20. So this is using 20 scale. And the reason for that is we've got a much wider typical section here. We've got a divided road with 2 lanes, bike lanes. So we've got a much wider typical section. And some of the other stuff in here, various other sheets we have. Typically with typical section sheets, I try to keep the same scale for all my sheets. So in that instance, like some of these details probably got scaled up to fit more properly on a 20 scale sheet. So we basically have something similar here that's 20 scale, that's right here in a 10 scale. So details and stuff like that, it's pretty easy to scale those up. But with these typical sections, if you ever have had to edit a typical section or add things to it, it's so much easier if everything is just to scale. So like this is 11 feet and this cross slope is actually 2%. Obviously, typically we would scale these vertically times 2 to match a cross section. That's usually how I start a typical section. I get a cross section, I reference it in here, and back in SS10 days, we used to be able to just copy that cross section in. That's a little more difficult now, so sometimes I just end up tracing over my cross section to get the groundwork here, and then we can begin putting all of our dimensions and leaders and all that stuff around it. So let's go, do we copy this in? We haven't copied this in. So let's just copy all of this stuff in. We can do a bunch of different examples of some cross-section sheets. So now that we've got this here, and remember to drop this cell. Did I drop this one yet? Did not? Okay. So we've got everything dropped. So let's just start. I mean, we can turn our drawing annotation on here to 20. And that should make everything in here look good and everything in here look too big. So let's just start by creating this. We'll just create these 3 sheets. So same way we did it before. We're going to go name boundary. And I want to use my drawing seed. Actually, before I do this, I want to take a look at something that I mentioned previously about the general note sheet. And I want to look at the utilities here and these item types and make sure that what happened doesn't happen again. So you can see here, this little triangle tells you that the local resource here differs from what's actually in the library. And you can see that the item type that I need is not here. So before I cut any sheets, I want to come in here and update all from library, and you can see my multi-line title shows up. That's the one I need. Now when you're creating new sheets, you shouldn't have this problem. The FTOT sheet info will be here, or it'll get loaded when you attach, or when you create the sheets, it'll bring that stuff in. It looks like just because these are some older files that maybe this multi-line title wasn't in here previously. Like when I opened this, I had to update from 10.11. So it could be that in 10.11 this didn't exist. So now that I've updated that, we shouldn't have the same issue that I had in the previous general note drawing. And so we can go back to creating our name boundaries, and we'll pick that project 11 by 17 plan only. And let's just, we want to first reset so we don't have a path element. And then I'm going to select all of these and then left click. And now I can begin populating my dialog box over here. So we'll just do typical section -01. Okay. So 01, obviously I said it in the beginning of this video, we like to have 2 digits here always. That just kind of helps organize things a little bit easier. And we have a new group. We'll just call it typical sections. And all these the same as last time. We've, using the view rotation, create drawing, and then we'll just click show dialog. So like I did before, I'm just going to delete the group name. And then here, these are intended to be 20 scale. Delete that. These are intended to be 20 scale. We don't need to worry about adding it to sheet index, but if you want to, I went over that in the general note sheet. And we'll just hit OK. Okay, so this time we've got that title top and bottom showing up, which is good. So we created those sheets. Obviously it says full size 1:1. It always says that in a sheet model, but if we go look at here, the drawing model, we're at 20 scale. Everything looks good. All the text is properly annotated in both the drawing and the sheet model. So if we go back to here, we don't necessarily even need to change the annotation scale out here. We can just come in and make another drawing, another name boundary. And this is the nice thing. So since I just created some sheets, it's got a lot of the things populated for me. So again, I want to right click I'm just going to click the one sheet, and then I'll come over here, and we want to start at 4 because we just created 0, 1, or 0 through 3, and I want to make sure this ends up in the same group. So then I can click and see how it'll be 04. So all this stuff will delete, and then this one I want to make sure this is 10 scale. 10 scale. Let's do a quick check, make sure everything looks good. Okay. So it's interesting that it's done this, figured out the reason. Now if we hover over this text, you can see that there is some small text in here. That's 10 scale like it should be. But what we're seeing is the 20 scale that's coming from the default model for some reason. So another thing that I did in the sheet seed is I set my nesting depth. This should be, I believe it's 1 or 2. I think it should be 2 from my sheet seed, but for whatever reason, the sheets that we're creating is not pulling that nesting depth from the sheet seed. And I know I've had that working in other previous versions of ORD, so it could be something with 10.12. It's something I'm going to have to investigate. I've been trying to figure it out for a while now. Most of the time, it doesn't cause a problem, but this time it is causing a problem, because if I change my nesting depth to 1, we look fine. So that just means that it's looking back to this drawing model for what it should look like, which makes sense. You want it looking back to here. Now, as soon as you change it over here in the sheet model to 2, we get the bigger text for some reason. And I bet if I come over to here, or to default, and I change my annotation scale to 10, and let that change, and then go back here, now we're good again. But sheet 3 will be too small. So this is a great lesson to learn here about, yes, while you can get different annotation scales to work within the same file, it's always a great idea to just pick an annotation scale, pick some sheet sizes, and then go from there. If you do find that you want to create some detail sheets that are smaller sheets, I would suggest creating a new file for those sheets. That's probably going to be far easier than having to deal with this. So if we go back to our other sheet over here, then we change this back to 20. Yeah, everything populates nice. And then we can just make this last sheet real quick. So it's already incremented it for me, which is cool. So it's interesting how it kind of learns a little bit as you go. But we'll right click, click. So everything's good. Like I want it to be 5. The group is typical sections. We're good. So if I click, deleting the name, make sure all this is good. This one's going to be 20. This one's going to be 20. And since we're 20 annotation scale out in the default model, we should be good. So it'll be interesting to see if we change this to 1 here, for example, and then come out here, play around with this, make this 10. What happens over here? Still look good. So if you absolutely do need to have multiple scales in your sheets, that's the way to do it, is to play around with that nesting depth. So I've run into issues many times with this nesting depth, and that's why I don't really like it when people use 99, because what I feel like it does is it like goes around and around and around and around and tries to find references to references to references 99 times. And so you end up getting like duplicates and just all sorts of potential problems that can happen when you are digging down 99 times into files. Whereas this one is just looking straight back at whatever's in 05, and that's what it's showing. So that's way cleaner. It probably will save you on processing time and all of that stuff because it's not having to dig down. Other times I've seen this affect things as things like line styles, or kind of similar to what we saw here, random like text annotation, but also like just random things showing up that shouldn't be showing up can happen because your nesting depth is too high. So always try to make sure you set that nesting depth to the absolute minimum that you can. Typically I would do 2 for a sheet like this because I want it to look back into the drawing model, which looks back into the default model. But it looks like we don't even need to do that because it'll just look back into the drawing model. So hopefully in the next version of ORD, or somehow I'll figure out why it's not taking this nesting depth. I had originally thought that it was something to do with, if we just go create another sheet here real quick from one of these. So let's just create plan drawing. So I had originally thought it would had something to do with this seed model, but this is using the seed model from my seed file, which is where I set the correct nesting depth. So I'm not quite sure why it's not using that nesting depth. Again, it could just be something inside of ORD that's not letting it do that, and it's definitely something we can look out for in later versions of ORD to see if it's something that's been fixed. But with that, that's pretty much all I have for this video. So we've kind of gone over how to create some general note sheets, how to create some typical section sheets. Obviously with the general note sheet, stick to full size 1:1. There's no reason to have to scale it at all. And then with typical sections, pick whatever annotation scale fits your typical section. Try not to scale your typical section up or do anything crazy like that. Always try to draw your typical section so that it's 1:1 horizontal and 2:1 vertical, just like a cross section, essentially. That way, if you never need to like hand draw anything, add something in here like, oh, I just want to change the sidewalk width to 5 feet or whatever, you just move this line over 1 foot. It's all exactly as it's supposed to be. Then you don't have to worry about the scaling issues that you have up here where like, oh, I need to know 22, so if I want a 10-foot lane, I got to do 20. I mean, it's easy math, but it's just unnecessary stuff that you have to do. So with that, the next video that I'm going to make, we'll go into plan sheets. We'll do a little bit and show you how to create a sequence of plan sheets and go into some details on that. Thanks.